Yeah, looks like we're ready to go. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to all of our guests joining us today. Dr. Dyke, thank you so much, as always, for coming to lend your research and publishing expertise. How are you today?
I'm very well, and happy Thanksgiving, Scott. Happy Thanksgiving to any of our North American participants, if you're listening to us on Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, well, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Although I'm Canadian, so we have Thanksgiving a month earlier. But by coincidence, in Japan today, it's also a kind of Thanksgiving Day. It's Labor Thanksgiving Day, where we celebrate labor by not working for a day. So,
It's
but
the
happy
best way to
Thanksgiving.
celebrate.
But
A
happy
day off,
Thanksgiving
right?
to happy Thanksgiving to everyone, to our guests who are joining us from the United States or here in Japan. Happy Thanksgiving Day to you. And guests are still coming in, it looks like. Gareth, we've got so far a great crowd today, it looks like. Fantastic, fantastic. We'll give everyone just a minute or two to file into the event, and we've just started live streaming on LinkedIn, so we'll also give a moment there for the stream to catch up to our feed from here on Zoom.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to let us know where you're from, do drop that into the Zoom chat or into the LinkedIn comments. Say a few things. Hi, I'm Gareth. I'm streaming from Budapest. Just drop your name, where you're from, into the chat, and we'll have lots of time for questions, lots of time for feedback and comments as we go through our event. You've got the chat box and the Zoom Q&A box where you can put any comments, any questions, or any feedback. Are you feeling ethical, Scott?
Always feeling ethical, Gareth, always. Let me just turn the chat on here for our guests. I think some are having trouble posting here, so let me make sure that we can all access the chat.
I also see a
Fantastic.
hand raised, which is great. Like if you want to put your comment into the chat, like we'll come back to that a little bit later on, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think our attendees should be able to chat with us now. Okay, here we go.
Great stuff. We should be ready to get started. Don't forget, this is an event that we're running, Sidetrain, Scott and I, and we're doing this for Bentham Science publishers. So we're streaming on the Bentham LinkedIn. If Bentham is a publisher that you've not heard about before, do have a look at benthamscience.com or eurekaselect.com. Lots of journals to choose from, right, Scott? Lots of great content that Bentham has for researchers around the world.
Excellent content in Bentham journals, some great impact factors, and a very robust peer review system, so you know that you're getting high quality content from all Bentham journals. Welcome, everyone. Some great messages coming into the chat here. Welcome to our guests.
I see UK, South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Brazil. Fantastic. This is great. Thank you for joining us from across all of these different time zones. It's absolutely brilliant. Scott mentioned peer review. We're going to be talking about peer review a little bit later on in our presentation today. UAE, Slovenia, absolutely amazing. And if you're listening to this and you can hear us on the LinkedIn stream, do give us a comment or a like or a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do something on the LinkedIn comment feed so we can know that you're interacting with us. We can follow up with you at the end of the event, because everybody who registered for this gets a number of things at the end of the event, right, Scott?
Absolutely. You get a certificate for joining us today, and we really appreciate you taking time to join our event today. We know that certificates are popular with all of our guests, so we'll make sure you get one within 24 hours after the event finishes today. So check your inbox for that.
Absolutely. And there'll be recordings of this event available as well, including on LinkedIn. So I think we should be getting towards our starting point. What do you think, Scott? Should we get cracking?
Fantastic. Yeah, I think everyone's filing in. So yeah, Dr. Dyke, over to you. Let's begin.
Let's begin. Thanks very much. Ethics is not a bad word. We're feeling ethical today in our presentation. We are going to spend a little bit of time talking about the ethics of academic research and academic publishing integrity, research ethics, big issues in the publishing industry at the moment, peer review, groups of peer review, collections of papers that haven't been properly peer reviewed. But the whole point of the training that we provide, Scott and I provide at SciTrain, working with Bentham Science Publishers, is to help researchers around the world understand some of these issues. I'm Gareth. I worked as an academic researcher for 25 years, publishing lots of papers, working still in academic publishing, working with a number of journals as an editor, as well as with a number of companies, including SciTrain. We are here to help. And what we do is we provide training support for researchers around the world with many of these issues. Our presentation today, thanks again for listening, it's divided into a number of different sections. And we're going to start off by talking a little bit about why it's important to understand a little bit about research ethics, why it's important, and how you can get up to speed to learn a bit more about what's required, both when you publish your research, but also importantly, when you do your research, collect your data and write up your work for eventual publication. Because generally speaking, and I know Scott would agree with this when he comes back in a moment, we'll have a chat about it. Most researchers who fall foul of ethical issues in the research process, in the research cycle, do so, the overwhelming majority do so because they are unaware that they've done something wrong. So understanding ethics in research and in publishing is very, very important. Little training courses like this, or indeed the longer format training that we do provide at SciTrain. If you get in touch with us, we'd be delighted to tell you more about that. It can really help researchers to avoid the pitfalls of ethics in research and publishing. And of course, ethics is really important. And we put just a few reasons for that onto this slide. Maintaining trust in your research and in the public at large, ensuring that your funding that you get, hopefully, I mean, many people wish they had more research funding, but if you've got some, congratulations, you need to ensure that it's being properly used to protect your research subject health and rights. Very, very important to ensure reliability and the accuracy of the work that you do and the data that you collect. We'll talk about credit a little bit later as well. Authorship is one big area where this comes up all the time, but making sure that the people, the team, the researchers involved in your project get the proper credit for the work that they've done. That's also an important part of ethics in research and publishing. Promoting scientific, academic publishing integrity, a big keyword at the moment, a big buzzword at the moment across the industry. And finally, we want to be ethical to aid collaboration so that other researchers will want to work with us, with our research group, with our university. And that, of course, is great because the way to speed up scientific progress is to collaborate, to work with other people, speed up that scientific process. So here's that research and publishing cycle. We like to call it the hamster wheel of academic research. You might be at a number of different stages in the research and publishing cycle with projects that you've got on the go at the moment. You might be coming up with ideas for your next project. You might be looking for funding for your next project. You might be collecting data. You might be at that journal selection stage that we'll talk about a little bit later on in this event. Paper writing, submission and peer review, and then publishing and post-publication promotion. And the wheel goes round and round and round, the old hamster wheel of academic publishing. You could be at a number of different stages on the cycle with different projects that you're currently working on. But understanding what to do and what not to do, importantly, in terms of the ethics of publishing and academic research is very, 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 very important, which is why we're here to hopefully help. Ethics matter at all stages of the cycle. Ethics of funding, ethics of research data collection, as we already touched upon a little bit earlier. The ethics of journal selection, predatory publishers. Everybody's well aware of the existence of these, but do you know how to spot one? Do you know how to figure out if an email that you get from a publisher inviting you to submit a paper or guest edit a special issue, how do you know that that's actually legit? We'll talk about that in a moment. Then there's the ethics of writing, citing, and plagiarism. You don't want to get caught by one of the plagiarism checking tools that the publishers are using. You've got to know what not to do so that you don't do it inadvertently with your own research. And then, of course, the ethics of submission, article submission, and the peer review process. And then perhaps an area that very many researchers would be extremely confused about, publishing copyright, because that's not something that is really ever touched upon in, let's say, a PhD program or a training program at a university. So ethics matter at all stages of the cycle, and they are a key part of doing what we like to call finer research, F-I-N-E-R, feasible, interesting, novel, ethical, and relevant. These are important things to think about when picking a research project. Is it finer? Is it feasible? Is it interesting? Is it novel? Is it ethical? And is it relevant? These are the kinds of questions, by the way, that journal editors ask themselves when they desk evaluate your submissions. So these kinds of checklists, very good idea to have a look at yourself before you begin the research process. And we put the source for this on the slide. You can have a look at that if you're interested. We can send you that PDF at the end of the presentation. So here are some ethical principles to keep in mind as you get started, as we begin our event today. Follow the guidelines. You've got some guidelines there on the top of the table. Protect your subjects. Get informed consent. Protect people's personal and private information. Don't cheat. Of course, that goes without saying. Nobody listening to this would ever be looking to do that, I'm sure, but it can happen by mistake. It can happen inadvertently. So we'll talk about that a little bit in this presentation as well. Don't steal from other people. Don't steal from yourself, as we'll come back and talk about as well in a moment. You've got to reproduce content with permission. If you need to reuse something from another paper, you've got to have permission to do that, even in some cases if that content is open access. State the authorship. Be true and accurate with your authorship statements, crediting your co-authors ethically. No ghostly or giftly authorships. We'll talk about what those are in a moment as well. Submit your work ethically. No salami slicing. Sending your work to just one journal at a time. And of course, avoiding predators, which we'll talk about as well in a moment. And those conflicts of interest. Researchers often ask us about these. They don't understand what they are. They don't understand how to complete those conflict of interest statements. So if you need help with that, of course, we are here as well. But these are ethical principles to keep in mind at the outset as we begin thinking about ethics in research and publishing. And there will be guidelines out there. There are lots of sources that you can go to get help with this. It's just that lots of researchers often don't. Your target journal, which you should be picking before you start to write. Have a listen to the presentations that we've previously recorded on the Bentham Science LinkedIn. You can have a listen to a target journal selection presentation there as well. They're going to have an ethics policy. Have a read of that. Because, of course, if your work doesn't comply with your target journal's ethics policy statement, they're going to reject it. So that's important before you begin to write. Your university will have a policy. PhD and master's students will be accessing this when they do their research. And then here are a number of other resources that are commonly recommended to researchers around the world. Very, very good places to start if you're getting into this, or if you're thinking about providing a course to your students, the Equator Network, the COPE guidelines, the Committee on Publication Ethics, the Singapore Statement linked here on the slide, and then the fantastically acronymed ICMJE, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. Absolutely great, really important, some key guidelines used across the industry, in particular for authorship. Who should be an author, how that can be decided, and how that can be determined, which is a key issue often for researchers, especially younger researchers working as part of a team. How can I be? Where should I be? What should my position on the authorship be? So guidelines to follow, the Equator guidelines for common study types. If you are a medical researcher, these will be particularly relevant to you. But again, all researchers do qualitative studies. They do observational studies, and they do often systematic studies. So these are well worth checking out, irrespective of your field of research, because they provide you with guidelines that you should follow. And that's important because funding agencies, national research councils, your journals will be following these guidelines. These are where they're basing their ethics statements. They're getting information from the Equator guidelines and turning them into specific guidelines for their particular journal. So the equatornetwork.org is a fantastic resource. If you're into reading guidelines, you'll find more than 100 to keep you entertained on their fantastic site. So that is also a great starting point. And that's part one, an introduction to research ethics and why that's important. In part two, this presentation has 4 parts. Don't worry, it's not going to go on for hours and hours and hours. I'm sure you'll be relieved to hear. In part 2, and Scott's going to come back in a moment as well, don't worry, the ethics of research data. So let's talk a little bit about that, because very important to think about this before you begin a study. Far too many researchers get to the submission point with a study, they send their paper off to a journal only for it to be rejected because there's an issue with their data. And that can be particularly the case with medical journals. If you don't have informed consent, if you haven't registered your clinical trial, for example, when you send your work off to a journal, they're going to check those points against their checklists at the editorial office. If you don't have those pieces of paper to hand, you're going to get rejected. And you can't do this retrospectively. You've got to do it before you begin the study. So if you're doing work that involves other people, like studies involving people, for example, qualitative and quantitative research across the humanities and social sciences, as well as across many of the STM subjects, science, technology, medicine, and mathematics, you need permission from an ethics committee before you start. Journals will check this, and it can't be done retrospectively. So do check before you begin. That's why this kind of training presentation, we hope, will be useful and informative and helpful before starting studies with assigned groups. Register your plan with the people before they sign up and get permission from your participants. Make sure people have agreed to join the study and they've agreed that their information is going to be published. You've got to safeguard personal information. That's a basic requirement of all of this kind of research. Your university will have guidelines, your funding agency will have guidelines as you maintain data privacy. People's information's got to stay confidential, and you've got to secure all of the data and all of the sources that you use in the study yourself. So this is point number 1 at the beginning of the research process. What we're going to do now is just make sure that you're all still awake. Are you awake, Scott? How are you doing? Feeling ethical?
I think so. I'm feeling both ethical and awake. Thanks for asking, Gareth. We have a very quick poll question to ask our guests today, just to keep everyone engaged. This was something I struggled with when I was doing my thesis. So the question is it ethical to try analyzing your data in many different ways until you finally get the results that you want or that you are expecting? If you think, yes, that's okay, then please choose the first option. You think that's okay? If you don't think that's okay, please click the second option. No. Let's see what our guests thought about this. Okay,
We're
answers
also
are
getting
coming in
questions
hot.
in.
Is this a question that your students have asked you in the past, Professor?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that people often are unaware of the answer to, as we're seeing, I think, with the responses to this quick poll in our event today, Scott.
Indeed, the answers are split almost right down the middle. 47% of our guests, now shifting a bit, but almost half and half. We'll end the poll here and see what kind of results we got in the end. Here we go. 47% said yes, it's okay, and 53% said it's not okay to do this, excuse me. Okay, let's see what the correct answer is, Gareth. Apparently this is not okay. Data dredging. It says this is a kind of data hack. And any thoughts on this, Gareth? Why is this not ethical to try this kind of sort of selective data analysis?
Because you should be testing a question, but you shouldn't have a preconceived idea of what the correct answer to that question is. You have to be fair, you have to be honest, you have to be ethical. You should be using the right kind of test for the question that you are collecting data to address. But having a preconceived idea of what the right answer is, and then manipulating your analysis until you get that right answer, is not the way that we should be working. I mean, that's not a scientific process. That's just, fiddling with the numbers until you get the answer that you expected. So no, it's not okay. And it is called data dredging.
Interesting. And I learned this when I was doing my thesis. Luckily, I had an advisor who caught this and said, no, no, no. I know you're looking to try to answer a question satisfactorily, but that doesn't come from hacking the data. So that was a term that another former colleague of mine used to use, was data hacking. So we're going to look at some other different common types of data hacking. And if you are an early career researcher or even an experienced researcher, you might not even know that these approaches are unethical. So back to you, Dr. Dyke.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about these already. I mean, data dredging, that's what we've just run our poll about. That's, where you manipulate your statistics or you manipulate your analysis until you get the answer you expected, which is similar to kind of going on a fishing expedition, as we call it, trying to find from your data or from your analysis results that you can take and use in your article that support the study's outcomes that you'd prefer. And this, by the way, is really, really, really an important reason why those conflict of interest statements that we talked about a little bit earlier should be filled in, because people reading your paper would want to know, for example, if you are working, let's say, on tobacco and health, as an example that I've just come up with, whether you've got funding from that particular industry, for example, because that's a conflict of interest that would lead potentially to people not being so happy with the outcome of your study. So be aware of that as well. P-hacking, as the name suggests, this is where you fiddle with those nasty little p-values until you get one that supports or falls within the boundaries of what you could use to argue would support your study. Parking also, and cherry picking we've talked about. This is where you take selectively outcomes from your results, from your data, from your analyses that would support a hypothesis that you have preconceived. And of course, we all will be in this situation where we have an expectation for our study. Of course, that's going to happen. That will happen all the time. But you need to make sure that your analysis is run fairly and your data is presented in a fair and open and transparent way so that somebody else, another research group in the future, can come back, repeat the analysis, and if necessary, disagree with you, because that's how the scientific process is working. And that's one reason why open data, open science is so fantastic, because you can and should share your data in an open and reproducible manner. Of course, that puts your reputation in a safer place and allows other people to agree with you or disagree with you in the normal scientific way. So sharing data is great. Journals and funders may mandate this, perhaps on their website, perhaps on your website, perhaps on the website of your university, open, hopefully, although, you know, many journals and many repositories are moving in that direction more and more. But we want to see reproducibility and transparency in your data, which enables collaboration and cross-disciplinary research. As I mentioned before, that's how things should be working, collaborating, publishing more papers, doing more research, making more of a difference comes from openness and comes from collaboration. And it builds trust, of course. If you're cagey and you're not going to share that data, or you're just going to share like selective pieces of your data, then people aren't going to trust you as much, and you're not going to be as accountable as potentially you should be. So sharing is caring, and sharing is great. So be aware of that. We don't have a lot of time in our presentation today to talk about data analytics, but of course, get in touch with us. We've got loads more other training presentations, other webinars, other workshops that we'd be delighted to provide to you or to your institution or to your research group. But that's part 2, data. Part 3, the ethics of writing and citing, our favorite part of this presentation, how to ethically put your paper together and, if necessary, cite and paraphrase those sources without getting accused of plagiarism, which is the topic of our next quick quiz. Scott.
Okay, quiz number 2. Thank you, Gareth. This is a question that we get all the time, and it was something that confused me, I remember, when I was doing graduate studies. So the question is it possible to plagiarize yourself? So let's launch our poll here. If you think this is possible, then click the first option. If you think, yes, it is possible, click the top option. If you think this is not possible, then click the top option is no, it's not possible. If you wrote it, you own it. The bottom option is, if you think it is possible, just because you wrote it does not necessarily mean you own it. It could be self-plagiarism, then click on the bottom option. Let's see what our guests chose today. Sorry to confuse you about the choices. No or yes, simple choices.
It means people are reading the slides carefully. That's perfect. And if you're listening to this on LinkedIn, you can also engage with us by putting what you think the answers to these quick quizzes are in the LinkedIn comments, or a thumbs up or some other emoji. It's great. It's a fantastic way of engaging with these events.
Okay, we'll finish up our poll there. I think all the answers are in, and the results are fairly evenly split. Okay, so 38% of our guests said, no, it's not possible to plagiarize yourself. If you wrote it, you own it. And 62% of our guests said it is possible. Just because you wrote it does not necessarily mean you own it. Well, it depends a bit on the timing, doesn't it, Gareth? Maybe you can give us some enlightenment on this. When is it possible to plagiarize yourself, if at all?
Unfortunately, this happens a lot in academic publishing because people are unaware of the situation. Self-plagiarism is a problem. I've fallen into this trap myself with one paper that I remember writing back in 2003, 2004. It's definitely possible, because if you make something, a table of data, let's say, or a map or a figure or some text, and you put it into a paper, you often think that you own that, right? And I did. I thought, that figure that I made the figure. I took the photographs, right? I own that. I don't need to cite myself when subsequently publishing the same or similar image in a later paper. But of course, you do have to cite yourself. It is possible to steal from yourself. And the best example of this, the easiest to understand example of this would be a picture, let's say, or a map that you've made for an earlier paper, and then you want to reuse it in a subsequent paper. You must cite the first use of that image or that map or that table of data, because you have to keep the citation sources rolling. You have to cite yourself. So unfortunately, yes, it is possible. Just because you wrote something, and we'll talk about copyright in publishing in a moment, actually doesn't mean that you own it anymore, right?
Thanks, Dr. Dyke. And we did already have a couple of questions from our guests about this, so I'm sure there'll be more questions coming in about accidental plagiarism and self-plagiarism. So thanks very much for your answer, Dr. Dyke, and back to you.
So we'll talk about this a little bit later in our event today. And as Scott mentioned, we've got some questions on this. But self-plagiarism is a problem, often because people are unaware that it can be a problem. And I can tell you more information about the sad story that I was part of a little bit later as well. But if you are taking sources from other work, and one of the very common questions that we get asked all the time by researchers around the world is how to summarize, how to paraphrase, how to synthesize my sources. Well, here are some tips for doing that in an ethical, reproducible way. And the best thing to do is to make notes always on what you read. Use a reference management piece of software like EndNote, like Mendeley, for example. Keep notes on what you read so that when you write about those sources in your paper, you can put the correct citations in. And I do this by grouping papers together around themes, right? Around questions or around particular themes. In my case, maybe it's a group of fossils, or it's a particular part of the family tree of a group that I'm working on. Put them in groups so that you can cite sets of earlier literature in your own writing. And you've got to do that in a balanced way, because peer reviewers look at that, editors look at that, and your colleagues in your community, in your research field, will also look at that. If you don't cite something that they've written that they feel is key, then they might have cause to put a reply or a commentary into the journal. So citing fairly and in a balanced way so that the work of other researchers is clearly, honestly, and even-handedly presented is also very important. And we do not encourage, and you should avoid, aggressive or negative citation approaches. Even if you disagree, you think it's the worst piece of research you've ever read, don't be aggressive in the way that you cite the work of others. Be fair. Put the work in a fair and even-handed and balanced way, because that makes you look better at the end of the day. And we see this a lot in papers that we edit. People are aggressive, people are nasty, people are really pointing out the issues in a really unfair, negative way. So this is all about ethics in writing and publishing as well. And as I mentioned before, we've got tons of content. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we'd be absolutely delighted to come back and talk about this in a later presentation, maybe with your research team or maybe with your university. Do get in touch with Scott and I at the end of this presentation. Section 4, the ethics of submission and peer review. Briefly in this presentation, here's this particular part of the hamster wheel, the bottom part of the cycle, where you're going from submission to peer review, and hopefully you're getting positive comments back from the peer review process. You're then going into that revision, resubmission part of the cycle that feeds back potentially into peer review again. Maybe you get some revisions that you've got to address. Maybe you get some comments that you need to focus on. You then send the paper back into the peer review process. We've got lots of other presentations and training again on how to deal with this part of the cycle, how to manage those pesky peer reviewers before the paper finally, hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, gets accepted, congratulations, and then moves into the production and post-publication part of the cycle. These stages all have to be handled carefully because there are ethical pitfalls at each step, and you don't want to fall into those ethical pitfalls. Starting off by picking a good non-predatory journal for your next paper, which is a huge issue, of course, for researchers around the world. We all get loads of emails. Dear Gareth, wouldn't you like to submit a paper to this journal or provide a guest edited special issue for the other journal? Many go into spam. Many you're sitting there thinking, is this real? Is this legit? Many open access journals are fake predatory journals because of the nature of the open access business model. The producer has to pay that pesky article processing charge. So of course, there's a business model that's developed around that where publishers, journals will try to get you to pay for publication without being a reputable journal, without doing proper peer review. And they'll try to cheat you out of your hard-earned money, your hard-earned research cash. And they're getting more and more sophisticated. Do have a look at resources like digital science, like Cabell's, for example. We'll give you other resources on this in a moment. There are some great places to go to learn more about how to spot those predatory publishers. But it can be difficult. It can be tricky. And there are numerous examples of really leading researchers, really high impact academic institutions where some of the output still gets published in journals that are not really doing peer review properly. So that's very important to think about and take time over when you get those emails inviting you to submit or guest edit, because it can be very tempting and we're all under lots of pressure to put our work into journals and get them published and get those Scopus Q1 and Q2 publications done. So have a look at the website. Is the URL strange? Does the site contain obvious errors? Is it indexed? Is the journal indexed in places like the DOAJ? Who's on the editorial board? Do you recognize their names? You can write to them. You can ask people who are on the editorial board if they're really on the editorial board. Are papers being published regularly? Are they on time? Are articles being properly peer reviewed? And fees. Never, ever, ever pay a publication fee before your paper has been peer reviewed and accepted. Avoid journals that ask for submission fees. They'll never ask for a peer review fee. If they're a reputable journal, you need to keep this in mind. And of course, spamming, sending lots of emails full of empty promises. A real journal is indexed. Here are some of the key ones on this slide. They've got a robust peer review process, and we're proud to point out that the Bentham Science peer review process is the most robust in the publishing industry, a database of 85,000 verified peer reviewers. We know who they are. Bentham knows who all of those 85,000 peer reviewers are, and they've all of them got H indices higher than 5. The peer review process is double blind. It's independent of editor control. The editor doesn't pick the peer reviewers. The Bentham online system does. The editor just makes decisions about whether papers should go into the peer review process and whether they should be accepted at the end. Double blind, verified peer reviewers with H indices greater than 5. That's absolutely fantastic. Do have a look at these resources as well if you are going through the process of trying to identify a journal for your next study. Take time over the process. And before you make that submission, have a look at this quick checklist that we put together to make sure you're not falling into any pitfalls in the submission process. Has your paper been published before? Does the journal accept submissions that have been pre-printed if you're thinking of using a preprint server? Does presenting your work at a conference affect your ability to submit to this journal? Does the journal have embargoes on previously shared content? Is your submission merely a thinner version of a fuller study? The famous salami slicing, the least publishable units that we do not want to see in academic journals. And translation. Is this a translation of a previous publication in another language? I've also fallen foul of this one. It's a complex area. Do get in touch with us for follow-up content on any of these, but it's a great checklist to have a look at before you start thinking about submitting your next paper. And very, very critical indeed, make sure you don't try to publish unless you have copyright permission. We'll talk about that in a moment, but translations, summaries, excerpts, blogs, reports, conference proceedings, discussion papers, working papers, and preprints could all potentially hold copyright. So you need to make sure that you understand what's going to happen next in the publishing process. Usually it's okay to publish your thesis, assignments, essays, conference abstracts, conference posters, grant application text, patents, and online trial registries. But if you've got permission, in many cases, you may need to check beforehand. Again, get in touch with us if you have specific questions about any of these issues. Check carefully before you make your submission. Let's have a quick look at the ethics of copyright and ownership as we come towards the end of our presentation today. Ethics of copyright and ownership are a big gray area for lots of researchers. And Scott's going to come back and jump in at this point, because now we're going to just ask another question, which is...
Thank you, Dr. Dyke. And by the way, we do have some hot questions coming in from our audience today, some really excellent questions. So we'll save a bit of time for Q&A at the end. But in the meantime, one more poll question for our group today. And the question is, and this relates to our earlier quiz question about self-plagiarism. So if you write an original work, does the copyright automatically belong to you? Now, in this case, we're talking about just after you finish this. So let's say you write something, you write a paper, a study. This is before you submit anywhere, before you sign away any ownership. Does that copyright automatically belong to you? Yes or no? What do you think? Let's see what our audience thinks today. Gareth?
It's another tricky one, and I would personally be expecting a pretty even split between those yeses and nos, because I'm also confused about this. What does owning the copyright of a particular piece of research actually mean? And I think that we're getting a pretty even split in our answers, right, Scott?
Looks that way, split almost down the middle. Again, the key to this question is before you submit anywhere, if you write something and it's an original work, does the copyright belong to you? Let's see, 40% of our audience said yes, it does, and 60% said no, that it doesn't. Well, this is a tricky one, but again, the key is before you submit anywhere, if it's something original, then implicitly, apparently, yes, the copyright does belong to you. But the key is until you sign it away or submit somewhere. As you were mentioning earlier, Dr. Dyke, tell us again the importance of if you've submitted something somewhere, that's where the ownership changes, doesn't it?
Very, very often, yes, because when you submit a paper to journals that we refer to as traditional journals, you're going to often sign over the copyright of your work to that publisher or to that journal. So you often get a copyright transfer form as part of the either the submission process or the post-acceptance process. At journals, I just used to tick that box and send it back without thinking too much about what I was doing, because in open access publishing, of course, it's a different story. And this is one area very, very confusing for researchers, but could be, should be, potentially, definitely is a major selling point, a major advantage of open access publishing. You retain the copyright of your work in open access publishing. But of course, as the poll says, when you write something, the copyright belongs to you. Of course it does. You're the creator of that work. But very often in publishing in general and in academic publishing in particular, depending on the journal type that you go to, you may end up signing the copyright away. So a quick summary of that here on this slide. The copyright is yours until you sign it away, as Scott was saying a moment ago. So understanding journal policies and the difference between traditional journals and open access journals is quite important in this context. And at least in our experience, this is something that researchers are very often completely, blissfully unaware of. So you're going to get a document object identifier for your work. If you preprint on a preprint platform, that's also the case. And consider, strongly consider, and there's cost implications. I've already seen a couple of questions on this in the chat box. Open access publishing, because you get to keep the copyright. And of course, a great idea, something that we always advocate at Bentham and in our workshops at SciTrain, is the idea of pre-printing your work to establish primacy. Let's say you go to a conference, you've written a conference abstract, you've written a conference presentation. Great idea to pre-print that so that nobody else can go off and listen to your conference presentation and then write that up as a paper on their own. You've got a preprint out there, you've got a DOI, a document object identifier number, you've got primacy, your research is protected. So here, again, as a summary, do take a screenshot of this, do listen back to this section of the presentation. Authors retain copyright and they can distribute their work freely before formal publication. Have a look at those journal policies again, because some journals have specific policies on accepting manuscripts that were previously shared as preprints. And posting a preprint does not usually affect your later rights to publish the work in a peer-reviewed journal. More and more journals are encouraging preprinting, and less journals are saying, we're not interested if the work has already been preprinted. So these can be cited. The use of the content is subject to copyright terms set by the author and or the preprint server. And this is done via what we call Creative Commons licenses. And again, we don't have time to talk in detail about journal selection and about open access publishing, but we've got lots more content and presentations. Get in touch with us. We will give you more information. Author rights. Authors retain copyright, allows the control of reproduction, distribution, and public display. You're going to have a different number of licensing options depending on your open access journal, depending on your preprint server. You'll get to specify very often how others get to use your work, which is a key aspect of open access publishing, not all that often talked about. And at least in our experience, authors are often unaware of it. So copyright protection allows you to reuse your own future publications, share them with colleagues, again, with proper attribution. You've got to cite yourself, as we've talked about in this ethics presentation. Can you share your work? Well, if you've got the copyright, of course, you can reuse it, save it, and share it, even for commercial purposes, which is a big difference between open access publishing and traditional publishing, where you've signed that over to the publisher. In that situation, if your journal holds the copyright or the license, they may restrict fair use. For example, quoting a small part of the paper may be allowed with proper credit. They might allow draft versions on preprint servers. They might allow sharing with an embargo, often at the big publishers, on a not-for-profit repository, like your website, for example, but you put the earlier version on there. Do check your target journal. Ask us if you have any questions. And you may get permission to distribute a few special print copies or online links. And we've put the most common kinds of CC licenses here on the bottom of this slide. These are the common two that open access publishers usually use. CC by NC, where you're permitted to archive and share the complete paper, but only for non-commercial use with proper attribution. And the CC BY, where you can archive and share the paper freely with required citation. Again, do get in touch with us. We are always here if you have questions, feedback, any thoughts about this presentation on ethics in research and publishing, or indeed any of the other presentations that we do, SciTrain does, Scott and I, with our publisher partners and friends across the industry. Scott.
Big thanks to Bentham Science as always. And we have some excellent questions coming in from our guests today, Gareth. So maybe we can get to some of our Q&A. Are we ready, Gareth? What do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's great to see so much engagement from events like this. And thank you, everybody, for coming along and asking questions. Let's get into it.
Okay, these are great. Let's look first at a question about submission. This is a great question. So I'll try to shorten the question a bit. This is one of our guests who submitted an education-related article, and it's now been more than 2 months since our guest submitted their paper to the journal and received an acknowledgement of submission. And our guest wrote an email asking about the progress, which is exactly what we recommend, right? As you always say, Dr. Dyke, right? Don't wait, communicate. That's exactly what our guest did. But no response yet to date. And so our guest is asking, can I withdraw my article and then send it to a different journal, informing the first journal that or informing the second journal that I first submitted somewhere else and withdrew my article? This is a great question.
Yeah, that is a really great question, and it's much more common than you might think. Unfortunately, yes. I mean, it's been a few months. You've only got one career after all. Like, what we would probably recommend in this situation is sending one more email to the journal editor. Make sure you've got the right email address. Make sure you've gotten that off the journal website. You're actually communicating with who you need to be communicating with. Go back to them again, ask again for an update. Do give some suggestions potentially for additional peer reviewers. Be helpful, be polite, give something back to the editorial office, but give them a time limit. You know, if I don't hear back from you within the next week, I will then be sending you another email and withdrawing the paper. This actually happened to me this morning at the journal that I'm an editor with. No peer reviews. We give the authors the option, and often they may come back to us and say, well, we're going to go to a more specialist journal. I'm withdrawing the paper. And that's what you need to put in writing to the editorial office. And yes, it's a very good idea when you submit to another journal to be open and transparent about the fact that you've previously had the paper with journal X when you go to journal Y, because the editors will appreciate that. They may get in touch with the editors from the earlier journal, ask for any peer review comments, ask for peer review suggestions. That's also common, but always better to be open and transparent, because that avoids any issues down the line. Great question, and good luck. Let us know how you get on with that situation.
And yeah, applause to our guest for taking the ethical approach of avoiding multiple submissions by asking this question. That's fantastic. Thanks for your question. Next question, is it ethical to use paraphrasing software in your study? I assume that means in your manuscript when writing your manuscript. Professor Dyke, what's your view on this? This is becoming increasingly a question, the extent to which we use AI and how ethically we use AI in our writing and editing. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's another great question. Fantastic. There's no problem with using AI tools in your writing, and in this case, in paraphrasing, if you are open and transparent about it. And all of the publishers now have guidelines on their websites about the ethical use of AI tools. They don't have a problem with it so long as you tell them that you've done it, okay? And that's the most important thing, because if you submit a paper to a journal and they check it with a number of other tools that are now available to, you know, highlight the use of tools like ChatGPT, for example, and you haven't told the publisher that you did use AI support when putting your paper together, you're going to get into hot water. So paraphrasing, absolutely no problem. One of the techniques that you can follow to do this might be to translate and then back translate or change the case of the work that you're looking at. Make sure you cite, and then in that statement, when you make your submission, you need to tell the journal either in the statement online or in the cover letter that you've done this, that you've used X, Y, and Z tools to help you with the writing and paraphrasing process. Great question. We are at a really unique point in journal and article writing and publishing. If you're an ESL, English as a second or third or fourth or fifth language author, there's never been a better time to overcome those pesky language barriers to publication. So fantastic and great question. Thank you for that.
Excellent question, and indeed exciting times. If you're a non-native English-speaking researcher writing your paper, there's so many tools now to help us with that. Time for a few more questions, Dr. Dyke. There's some great questions here. This is a question from Mohammed, and the question is it ethical for publishers to charge hefty amounts as publication charges? Oh yeah, those APCs. Any thoughts on this, Gareth?
Oh, that's a really good question, Mohammed. Like, close your ears. I do not think that massive APCs, hefty article processing charges, should be charged by publishers. But if you talk to publishers, they'll say something quite different. And of course, the charges for those APCs scale against impact factors. So if you're going into a journal with a high impact factor and you want to convert your paper to open access, that's called hybrid journal publishing. Or if your open access journal is with a big reputation or has a decent impact factor, you can expect to pay a hefty article processing charge, which range, by the way, between 0 in diamond open access journals, society journals, all the way up to $11,000 for some of the leading journals out there in the world. So I think that's a great question, Mohammed. My own personal opinion, for what it's worth, is no. But, you know, this is academic publishing. It's a business. So, you know, different people will have different answers to that question. But we do understand at Bentham Science, we are a company from the global south. We work with researchers all around the world, but we are uniquely positioned to understand this particular problem. So do get in touch with us. Do talk to our team. We often have routes to publication where charges are minimized at Bentham Science Publishers. So thank you for that great question. Thank you.
Another great question, and it's very heartening to hear these questions because we can see that our audience care about these issues. They want to do the ethical thing, and we find that that's overwhelmingly the case. Most people, when they commit ethical errors, it's generally accidental, and we know that people want to do the right thing. So these are all great questions. Time for a couple more questions, Dr. Dyke. Here's a question from Javiria, and the question is, can we publish without a supervisor? Of course, his name would be mentioned, but still, if he's busy or showing no interest in the publication. This is a question that we often get. I guess this relates to gift or ghost authorship. If you have an advisor or a supervisor who's not interested or not showing any interest in the study, what are the ethical guidelines about including that supervisor's name as a co or even a leading author? Ooh.
This is a really tricky one to answer because it's a thorny issue that affects early career researchers all over the world, all of the time. Of course, ethically speaking, an authorship on a paper requires a significant contribution. So do have a look at those ICMJE, the International Committee Medical Journal Editors Guidelines. COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, also have some great guidelines, but generally speaking, an author on a paper has to have made a significant intellectual contribution as well as contributing to the writing, editing, and production of the manuscript. But having said that, of course, supervisors the world over expect often to be added to papers that their students have written. Is that ethical? I throw that out there. It's a problem in academic publishing everywhere. My advice to you is to go to your department head, go to people in your research department, in your university, who can give you some specific advice about this question that will be watertight at your institution, because the last thing that you want to do is do something that might affect your future career or your relationship with your PhD supervisor. So talk to other people in your institution is my advice. Second piece of advice when writing papers is always agree on the authorship of those papers before you begin the process of putting the paper together. Sit down or virtually sit down with people who should be authors, agree all of this beforehand, including the order of authorship, so that you don't face any problems down the line. Yes, very interesting question. Scott, we should put together some additional content on that particular specific issue. But yeah, it's a big issue. Your university should be able to help you with the answer to that question. Thanks for it. And again, good luck. We're here if you need support and further guidance from our side.
Great question, and thanks as always for your expertise, Dr. Dyke. We maybe have time for just a few more questions. We have so many great questions tonight. I hope we can try to answer all of them. If we can't get to your question, we apologize in advance. Please reach out to us. You've got our email in the event invitation, and if we can't get to your question today, we will, of course, be happy to answer it later. So a couple other questions that came in through the chat. Let's see. This is another great question about ownership of thesis. The question is from Chinmai, and the question is, our final year engineering students do a project as part of the fulfillment of their degree. Who owns the copyright? The university to whom our college is affiliated to, our college, or the students? Well, that's a great question.
Wow, that is a great question. Who owns the copyright of a student engineering project like that? Well, your university, again, will have guidelines on this. There'll be an ethics policy, and there should be, I hope there are answers to this question on your institution's website. Usually, but not always, your institution, unfortunately, ultimately owns any IP that you might generate whilst working for that institution. So if you're employed by the University of X, ultimately the University of X, because they're your employer, will own the IP ultimately. But that's not the same as copyright, as we've talked about in this presentation. And depending on the country that you're in, I know it's the case in the UK, for example, students are not governed by the same IP regulations as full-time university employees. So check with your university on that really interesting question. They, I hope, will have a clear answer to that, because it depends on the country, it depends on the local regulations, and it depends on your institution. These are students, so it's a gray area, like who actually owns the IP, the university or the individual ultimately. So, but thank you for that really interesting question. That's one of the most interesting questions we've got in a long time, right, Scott?
Definitely. Yeah, fantastic question. And we've got a few more. I realize that your time is precious, Dr. Dyke, but do we have time for a couple more questions from our guests today?
We always have time to help people. Absolutely, of course. Let's keep going. Wonderful.
Great. We have a couple of raised hands here, and maybe our guests can clarify their questions. There's a question from, this is from Professor Singh, and the professor asks whether copyrighted work can be patented by others. Does this fall under infringement? Oh, patenting is a whole other fantastic topic. In fact, I'm hoping we can do a whole event just on this fascinating topic. I have a colleague in Germany, Dr. Ansgar, if you're listening, who would be perfect for that. A quick answer for Professor Singh on patents and copyright infringement, Dr. Dyke. Is that something you could speak to just now?
I'm going to leave that for our next event, I think, Scott, because I'm not an expert in this particular area. But I would recommend that, you know, if you have something that you think is commercializable, if that's even a word, if you've got something that you think should be patentable, I mean, talk to your local office. I mean, talk to your national patent office, talk to your university, and move quickly towards doing that. Okay, so I mean, the more you do, the more protected you are. Something that we do want to mention in this context are the patent reports that Bentham Science publishes. We are actually the only publisher that puts out a series of patent report journals. So do have a look at those on benthamscience.com, eurekaselect.com. If you're working in a particular subject area and you want an up-to-date list of the patents that have been filed around the world in your area, Bentham Science has that information available for you. But specifically on that question, I mean, the copyright is different to commercializable intellectual property in that context. So you want to have both in place, is my understanding. But like, you know, Dr. Angol, when he does his presentation for us, Scott, will give us a much clearer answer to that question. So stay tuned.
Fantastic. I just lost audio for a moment there, but I think we're coming back in. I think we're almost running out of time here, but maybe we can handle just one or two more if you've got time, Dr. Dyke. These are all great questions. Yeah. And if we can't get to your question just now live, feel free to reach out to us. You've got my email. And apologies if we didn't get to your question today. This is a short and sweet question for you, Dr. Dyke. Should we be removing the preprint the moment our pre-printed paper is published with the journal?
No, because the pre-printed work is linked to the final published version of record, as it's called, and the two will be interlinked for time immemorial. Of course, the preprint is just an earlier version of the final published version of record. So no, and in fact, most preprint servers strongly discourage the removal of preprints in any case. You have to have a strong case. For example, if you want to take a preprint down from a preprint server, you can always update your preprint. And in the ideal situation, in the open publishing model, you'd have a series of preprints leading to that final published version of record, so everybody can see how the work has evolved over time. And that's really useful. Open peer review, you're changing your idea, you're changing your work, and that's great for the scientific process. I love that. I think that's really important and a key component of open science and open research. So no, it's the short answer to your question. Thank you for it.
Fantastic question. And if we were not able to get to your question today live in the event, we apologize. We're just running out of time. And in the interest of Dr. Dyke's time and everyone else's, we'll finish the event there. And feel free to ping your question into the chat, either here on Zoom or on LinkedIn if you're listening live. And we'll get to your question as soon as we can. Apologies if we couldn't answer everything today, but these are all wonderful questions. Thank you, Dr. Dyke, as always, for sharing your expertise. I always learn so much from doing these events together with you. Any final thoughts for our guests today, Gareth?
Thanks, Scott, for the participation. Great to work together, and happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Happy Thursday, and do get in touch with us. Sidetrain, Bentham Science Publishers, if you have any follow-up or you'd like to learn any more information. Have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
The link to Bentham's website is in the chat window. So on behalf of Bentham and everyone, thanks so much. And thank you, Dr. Dyke. Thanks, everyone.